So when I was starting to get ready to do this talk, excuse me for ruffling my papers here just a second. Okay, here we go. When I was starting to get ready to do this presentation, one of the things that occurred to me was that getting this book would be really helpful when bad things happen to good people, because the story of Job is very much about the struggle we all go through when bad things happen to us. But unfortunately, this book did not arrive until Saturday, so I haven't really had a chance to go through it. But I did fan through it, and I did find one thing to be very interesting. He's got a whole section on Job. So I knew I was on the right track in picking this book. So I would recommend it because I have heard good things about it. I was talking to one of the other members of Spirit Keepers a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about my next presentation, and she made this remark to me about me being very conventional, which I was surprised to hear, because I don't think of myself as being very conventional. And I wondered, why would she say that? And I realized it's because I'm probably not doing enough to piss people off. So I've decided today, thank you. I decided today that I would do a few things that might piss some people off. And if I do this really well, I'll piss everybody off a little bit. And that's not a bad thing, because actually when we get angry, that's energy for change. And when we get angry about something, we have this possibility of actually looking at something in a different way. So I'm going to start by, as you know, I'm doing this whole series on Christian mythology. And, well, some people actually might be pissed off by the fact that I'm calling it mythology, because the Bible is the Word of God, right? So how can you call it mythology? Well, for me, when I say something is mythological, that's a high compliment for me. Because what I'm really saying is that there's substance in this story. And that myth always has layers and layers and layers of meaning. And we do ourselves a disservice when we don't take the time to look at a story and to re-examine a story and go deeper with a story. So I really know that in my practice, once I got over my anger about my upbringing and the Bible and things of that sort, and I started to look at it, I actually was delighted to find a lot of really good stories that I thought were worthwhile. But I also want to say to you that there's a lot of idiocy in the Bible. I'm hoping that offends some people. Maybe not here, but I'm hoping some people might be offended. So I want to give you an example of some of the idiotic stuff that we find in the Bible. In Leviticus 18:22, it clearly states that homosexual lifestyle is an abomination. So, well, there's justification for the persecution of homosexuals within our culture. But did you know that Leviticus 11:10 says that eating shellfish is an abomination? So all of you, people out there that love lobster and crab, you're engaging in abomination. So, you better change your behavior. In Exodus 21:7, it's sanctioned that it's okay to sell your daughter into slavery. In Leviticus 25:44, it states that you may indeed possess slaves, both male and female, provided they are purchased from neighboring nations. So the question is it okay to own Mexicans but not Canadians? Exodus 35:2 clearly states that anyone should be put to death for working on the Sabbath. So that's a pretty scary idea. And that you're not supposed to get your hair trimmed, especially around the temples, because it's forbidden in Leviticus 19:27. Leviticus 11:6 through 8 says you may not touch the skin of a dead pig. Uh-oh, that's trouble for all the football fans in the world. Leviticus 19:19, you may not plant two different crops in the same field. Or you may not wear garments. You may not wear garments made of two different kinds of thread. Well, we're all in trouble, aren't we? We probably all have multiple types of cloth on. And then you could ask this question: is it necessary to get the whole town together in order to stone a blasphemer, as it says to do in Leviticus 24:10 through 16? Couldn't we just burn them to death at a private family affair like we do with people who sleep with their in-laws, as that we're told to do in Leviticus 20-14? So obviously there's a lot of idiocy. But there's also a lot of wisdom when we take the time to look through these stories a little bit more in depth. So today we're going to talk about the story of Job. And Job is, when we look at this story and we think about the story, it's important for all of us to understand that any of these stories are our stories. So we should listen to it that way and realize that each one of us, and if you listen to it carefully, you'll see and recognize that you have done something similar to Job. His story is our story because Job is someone who gets upset when it seems as if something happens in his life that is unjust. Have we not all had experiences in our lives of things that happen to us that we have no reasonable explanation for? Where, sometimes we just screw up, and yes, things turn bad because we do that. But then other times we have events happen to us in our lives that we cannot justify, we can't explain. We all have to deal with injustice. I had a client a couple of weeks ago who was sitting at my table who was saying that she was just now starting to get a little pissed off at God for the fact that she was abused as a child. So many people have experienced abuse when they're children. And how can you possibly explain that? How does a just God allow that to occur? You can't, the tendency in most cases is to look at things and say, well, this is punishment. You must have done something wrong. But children are innocent. For me personally, when I was 2 years old, my father died, and that totally disrupted my whole family. And I used to say that I was the orphan in the family because after my father died, my mother went to work, and it was like I lost both my parents. So, again, why? Why would this injustice happen to me? Some people lose children at birth or from SIDS, or maybe even when they're a little bit older. The death of any child is a horrible trauma for a parent and a very difficult thing to do. And how could you not shake your fist at the heavens and say, why? Why take this innocent child away from me? We all wonder what happens. So as you hear the story, as I go through the story, it's important for you to hear all of the different characters as not just characters in a story, but recognize that you have had moments in your life in which you have had dialogue with someone, you've had a conversation with someone, and you argued with them. Their voices were giving voice to thoughts within yourself. All of the different characters in this story represent parts of yourself, and I do mean all of the characters. Job himself, Job's wife, Job's friends, and even God were all part of Job, and it's what we call a Gestalt perspective. And when you look at it, then it becomes a little easier to recognize, because when we engage in a process like what Job does, we find that we can have experiences like Job where it literally seems as if we will hear a voice in our head that will help us to find clarity and to make sense out of the things that unfold in our lives. So let's talk about the story. So what we are told in the beginning of the story is that Job was a very penitent man, and he avoided all evil behavior. He always was very good about going to temple, and he was very, very spiritual in his practice. He was very successful, very prosperous, had lots of material wealth. He had lots of cattle and sheep, and he had wonderful children. And he was very rich and prosperous, and everything was going good for him. So that's how his life was going along. And then what we read next in the story is that one day the sons of God came to be present, gathered together to be present with God. And amongst them was Satan. Now that right there is a fascinating phrase. That's a fascinating piece of the Bible. Because usually when people talk about Lucifer or Satan, this is the mortal opponent to God, and that there's a struggle going on in the heavens between the forces of good and the forces of evil. So what the heck is going on here? It's like they're having a barbecue and they invite Satan to the barbecue? And he shows up, and they're all like hanging out. And God says to Satan, he says, hey, how you doing? Where you been? What's been going on? He says, oh, I've been down at the earth, and I've been sort of going back and forth and, going all over the earth. And he says, hey, when you were down there, did you notice my friend Job, who I am very proud of? And Satan says to God, he says, well, he's pretty cool. But you know what? If you let me have a run at him, I bet he wouldn't be quite so spiritual. And God says, well, I'll take that bet. So they sort of have a wager, and he says, you can go down and you can take away from Job everything, but you cannot mess with him personally. You cannot mess with his body. So Satan goes down and he puts into place all these things that happen, like he loses his material well-being, he loses his crops, he loses his animals, he even loses all his children. So he's destitute. He has nothing left other than his health. And but he holds on to his faith. He says, well, there's got to be a reason for this. Doesn't ask what the reason is, but he just sort of says, okay, well, there's something going on here I don't understand. But he does not question what occurred or why it occurred. So God and Satan get together again, and God says, well, see, he was pretty cool. He says, well, you know what? Yeah, but I think I was getting close to wearing him down. So let me have a go at his body. God says, all right, fine, you go ahead. So Satan goes down and he causes Job's body to be covered in boils and sores and things of that sort. So he's basically walking around in a state of torment. Well, so everything is gone. He's lost everything, and now Job is starting to get a little bit worn down. He's sitting there and he's like, oh, I don't get this. And his wife says to him, maybe you should just curse God and die, because apparently she was pretty mad because she lost all her children. But Job doesn't do that, not right away. And then what happens is his friends come to him and they sit with him and they have a dialogue. Job's response at this point, because of his loss of everything, is he says that he wished that he would have died. He wished that he could die. And he also says something really interesting, which is one of the revelatory moments in the story. He says, that which I have feared has come upon me. We all know that fear can be a very empowering energy. So if we allow ourselves to stay in a state of fear and not really investigate what things are about, then very often we draw into our lives the very thing that we're afraid of. So that's a very important thing to understand that comes out of the story. His friend said to him, well, Job, you must have done something to deserve this. He says, whoever is innocent the friends say to him, whoever is innocent is always protected. The righteous are not cut off, and the wicked are always punished. Happy is a man, they say, that is corrected by God. We have searched everywhere, and so it is. Know that this is for your own good. So this is very interesting, because basically what they're doing is they're regurgitating the standard viewpoint on suffering in life. Anything that happens has to happen because you did something wrong. And this is a very pervasive attitude within Christianity and Judaism, that if something bad happens, it's because you did something wrong, and there's no other explanation for it. And Job says to them, teach me and I will hold my tongue. So what's starting to happen now is Job is starting to feel like he wants to say something. He wants to ask the question. He says to them, how forcible are your right words? In other words, your self-righteousness about what is right and what is wrong is very powerful. And how forcible is that? But it doesn't give Job any comfort. Instead, he says, in death the weary are granted rest, and the wicked are the trouble for the wicked ceases. In death there is peace, so please dig a pit for me that I might die, that I might not hear anymore the voice of the oppressor. Because when one dies, the servant is freed from the master, and man is freed from the trouble. He says, I wish that I were like the sparks of a fire that fly up to heaven. I want to go to heaven. I want to get away from this trouble and difficulty that I am facing. And his friends say to him, do not despise the chastening of the Almighty. And Job says to them, my troubles are heavier than the sand, and the poison of what is happening to me drinks up my spirit. When shall this night be gone? What strength do I have left that I might hope? Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. What's wrong with me that I cannot make sense of what has occurred? Why can I not see the goodness in these events in my life? If I have sinned, why does God not reveal to me my transgression? And his friends say to him, does God pervert justice? In other words, does God play favorites? All the days of the earth are days in shadow, which is very interesting because what they're really saying is we can't understand why these things occur. So we should just follow our faith. I know that when I was a kid, one of the things I used to do, speaking of pissing people off, is I used to go to Sunday school or catechism, and I'd always raise my hand, and I'd always ask these questions. And the priest would always get pissed off at me because I was seeing that there was a lot of holes in this doctrine. I remember asking this Monsignor a question and watching his neck just get bright red because he was just so angry at me. And I wondered, why was he so angry? And one of the things they used to say to me is, well, it's a mystery that you cannot understand. It's something that's not within your capacity to know. And of course, my thought is, well, is it within your capacity to know? Then teach me, just like Job is saying, teach me to understand how to make sense of this. Well, they can't because there's fallacies in their thinking. There's fallacies in their thinking. The friends go on to say a couple of things that are valid. They say, can the rush grow without mire? There has to be some shit, if you will, in order for things to grow. That's what that is. And so they're saying, you know, your growth will come out of this once you figure it out. And those who forget God, their houses will not stand. Well, you know, I've talked about this before. If we lose our sense of connection to Spirit in whatever form or whatever path we take, what are we left with? We're left with the ego. And the ego pursues all the different things in the world that say you will find happiness here, you'll find joy here. And as we pursue these things, we get some gratification from them, but it seems as if there's never enough. In other words, our houses, the place where we live, will not stand because we've abandoned our connection with Spirit. And Job says, if God will not withdraw his anger, how shall I reason with him? So he's saying, if God will not withdraw this pain and this punishment, how can I ever figure this out? It seems to me that God destroys both wicked and good people alike. Let not my fear of God terrify me so that I cannot speak. So we're beginning to see a shift. Job is starting to work up the courage. When I was talking to this lady a few weeks ago about her situation as a child and being abused, one of the things she said is, you know, I'm really just starting to get pissed off with God. And I said to her, then be pissed off. Give voice to your anger. Let yourself say this. And I could see her cringing, like, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. Because if I did that, I would offend God. Well, I got to say, in my life, and many times I have raised my fist to the heavens and said, I can't make sense of this. I don't understand this. And then I'd wait for the lightning bolt. But it never came. I think Spirit is far too big and beyond what any and all the doctrines could possibly say about that. There's always going to be more that we can discover about Spirit. There's always going to be more and more to truth for us to unearth. But we have to have that willingness to challenge our understanding. And that's really what the questioning mind is all about. And one of his friends says to him, listen, should you not be answered? If God would speak, he would reveal his wisdom. How could you possibly hinder God? God is everywhere. If you should look, you would forget your misery. So in a way, they are encouraging him. So finally, what Job does is he turns to God and he starts to talk to him. And he says, I know that you are all power, and no thought can be held from thee. I have spoken because I don't understand. I beseech you. I command you. I beg of you. Teach me, for I cannot find order in this darkness. So here we see the beginning of an effort to question. We know that all the great advances of civilization come about because people do not accept conventional teachings about things. Doctors challenge conventional understanding about medicine in order to discover something new. Many of you may know this. Sigmund Freud, when he first started to say to the Vienna School of Medicine, hey, you know, maybe there's something wrong here with people that has nothing to do with their bodies. Maybe it has something to do with their consciousness, with their thinking. The reaction that the Vienna School of Medicine had was to literally laugh him up. And that's often the case. That's what happens when we challenge or raise a question that people aren't ready to look at. But sooner or later, we have to deal with these things if we're going to have an advance in consciousness. And after all, this is what it's all about. It's all about the evolution of consciousness. We say here, we dance here, and what is our practice? To move towards the one. To move towards the one means that nothing can be left out. We have to make sense of everything. And one of the things that we have the most difficulty with is this. This is an illustration from the Tarot, and it's called the devil. Now remember, earlier in the story, Satan, the devil, comes and he hangs out with God. So that sort of gives us this idea that maybe there's a different relationship going on between spirit. If we are going to move towards the one, then nothing can be left out. So we have to make sense of what this is about as well. And what this is this is the dark angel. I believe that every culture has some form of this. And what this is are the things about spirit that we don't like. The things about spirit that we want to push away because we're not comfortable with. Because what does this energy do? What does Satan do with Job? He basically tortures him or torments him in order to get him to start to do what he's doing, which is question. This energy is the energy that makes us uncomfortable, but what it does is it lights a fire within us to seek the truth. And that's how we discover the truth. That's what scientists do. If you look at this card closely, one of the things you see is the people are sort of turned away. They're not looking at the devil. And I think that's one of the most important messages on the card, because it says that most of us will turn away from things. We don't want to look at them because we're worried or we're afraid of that this might be more powerful than us. But when we contend, we find the truth. When we push past the fear, we find the laws and principles that govern the universe and set ourselves free. If you look carefully, you can also see that the chains around their necks are pretty loose. They could take them off. And what I say is, in order to take those chains off, you have to face your demons. You have to face those things in life that are difficult for you, and you have to grapple with them. And you have to trust that within you, Spirit has given you the strength. Spirit has given you the capacity to find the truth. Because what happens when Job talks to God is very interesting. Because for the first time in the whole story, there actually begins to be a dialogue between God and man, or spirit and man. Now, how you read what Spirit says is of the utmost importance. Because what God says to Job is, who is this that would speak without knowledge? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I set the stars in motion in the heavens and the morning stars sang together? Well, you could read that as, who the heck are you to ask these questions? But I think you have to notice that what's going on in this story is that there's a dialogue happening. This is like the first time in the whole story where spirit and man are actually having an interchange. If he was not supposed to ask the questions, why would Spirit give him the time of day? So there's something right in his willingness to speak and to ask the difficult question. And if you think about your life, when you have asked those difficult questions about, why did this happen to me? What was this about? When I asked the question about, why did God take my father from me? What was that about? I was eventually able to make sense of that. Some things we are still working on. Some things we're still unearthing what the answers are. There's a great deal of work that remains to be done, and we are the ones to do it. Evolution is not finished. We are conscious beings capable of participating in the evolutionary process. And dialoguing with Spirit is a key to that process. Just like the scientist who has an absolute conviction that he can figure out the laws and principles that are operating when he deals with disease, he has an absolute conviction the world is an orderly place. And that conviction eventually leads him to the truth. We have to have that same level of conviction and to realize that Spirit's not going to be mad at us because we have the audacity to ask the question. It's going to be like what happens here. We're going to start to hear answers. I know when I've asked questions, I didn't hear it as a booming voice in the heavens, but I heard a small voice in my head that I knew was not my own. And that was the beginning of me beginning to understand. So how he says this, how God answers Job, it's important in how we hear the inflection. Because you could hear it as, who are you to ask these questions? Or you could hear it this way. Hey, Job, where were you when I put the stars in motions in the heavens? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? In other words, did I lay the foundations of the earth with you in mind? Or did I make the world in an orderly way? Where were you when I set the stars in motions in the heavens and the morning stars sang together? It wasn't about you, Job. The way the world is made, it's not personal. And then he says to Job, have you searched? Have you understood death? Well, that right there, boy, that's a really interesting thing. I don't think anybody can say that they fully understand death. You have a lot of different people saying a lot of different things about it, but ultimately it's the great mystery. We cannot know what that's about until we make that transition ourselves. So what God is saying is there's so much that man does not understand. And he goes on, I love this. He says, where is the way that light expresses? Light is an amazing phenomena in our universe. And what God is doing is he's challenging Job to understand how light expresses. And where's the place of darkness? What is darkness really but the absence of light? And by what way is the light parted? We know that in the beginning, science says that there was this thing called the Big Bang. And the Big Bang was an explosion of light. But eventually that light resolved itself into energy and matter. As science investigates and goes deeper and deeper and deeper into the physical universe, more and more it doesn't seem to be quite so physical. It seems to be more energetic. One could conjecture that everything in the universe are just various forms of light that are parted into different forms. And God says, can you bind the Pleiades? Is it within your capability to know the ordinances of the heavens? And he says, who has put wisdom in the inner parts? God is saying that he, she, it, the force has put the wisdom in all of the universe. And he goes on to say, who gives understanding to the heart? So God is telling Job, there is understanding in your heart. The heart is different from the mind. The heart feels and it leads us forward. The mind looks backward and tries to make sense of what's occurred, but it is the heart that really leads us. God says, I have not given animals wisdom or understanding. I've given that to man. Whatever is under heaven is mine, meaning everything that is so because I've created it. And, this is most important, he says, I will not conceal. In other words, it's there for you to figure it out. And then he says, a very interesting thing, he says, do you have an arm like God? Well, some people would say as well, do you have the audacity to think of yourself as being like God and having a creative force? And that would be easy to see it that way, except there's a line that follows not too long after that where God says, your right hand can save you. So he's saying you do have an arm like God. And your right hand can save you. save you from your trouble, save you from your difficulty. So what is the right hand? Classically, at the time the Bible was written, the right was associated with masculine and the assertive, while the left was associated with feminine. So he's saying by your assertiveness, you can assert your attention forward and you can understand. He's challenging them. Just as well, I don't know if I can do this. As God says, gird up your loins like a man. In other words, find your courage. To shake your fist at the heavens is an act of courage. And I got to tell you, I was scared that lightning bolt was going to come, but it didn't. And I got to say, every time in my life when I have been willing to question anything that anybody says, including my teachers, I've always been able to uncover a deeper level of truth and a deeper level of the perfection of Spirit's creation. When you look at oneness, you see perfection. And Job says, you know, I've heard this before, but now my eyes see. Another really important line. Because what he says is, I've heard a lot of rhetoric, but today I see, meaning today I understand. And God says to Job, deck yourself with majesty and excellence, array yourself with glory and beauty, and your sorrows may be turned to joy. What he's really saying is, find the attributes of truth. Find the attributes of my creation. Find the attributes of perfection of the universe and array yourself in that glory. Don't give up. Don't turn away, because this is the work that man does, seeking the truth. And that journey is far from over. Because when you do that, then you can walk on the earth without fear. And then something very interesting happens. God turns to Job's friends and he says, you have not spoken of me the thing that is right, as Job has. What is he saying? Well, a lot of times people just regurgitate doctrine, but they're not speaking the truth. They're not seeking the truth. And God is saying, Job's doing the right thing here. Job is questioning. His friends spoke of theory, but Job talked about practice. It's harder to have the courage to question. God does not punish Job for his audacity in questioning. Instead, he rewards him. What we read in the story is that shortly thereafter, everything was restored to Job. In fact, it says that he had twice as much as he had before. So, this whole story is encouraging us to have the courage to question any and all things in order to seek the truth. And realize that our woundedness, things that happen in our lives, things that could be unjust, very often can turn out to be very fruitful, very worthwhile when we are willing to seek the truth in them. So today I'll leave you with this thought. Accept no doctrine. See Spirit in all doctrines. Seek Spirit in the dark recesses of your soul and bring forth new light. Seek Spirit everywhere and you will find it there.